whether we're teaching a class on how to become a restorative classroom leader and a warm demander, like I'm thinking about my Compton babies. I'm thinking about my East Palo Alto babies. I'm thinking about what they need. How do we approach a classroom to create a affirming, loving, beautiful, vibrant community that honors who they are, their cultures, their communities, their families, and breaks down every facet of carcerality in schools, every facet of overly disciplining Black and brown young people in schools. How do we break all of that down to cultivate spaces that are the opposite of that, that are vibrant, affirming, restorative classroom spaces?
Today we're joined by Jeff Camarillo, a seasoned educator and school leader, and now the assistant director at the Stanford Teacher Education Program. Jeff brings his years of experience in direct service and his perspective preparing teachers to provide a unique insight on the current state of education, especially as it relates to the Black and brown teens we're building for. Let's dive in.
All right. Jeff, Mr. C, as I learned, I met you when I was 15, right? I think you were teaching at Mural Music and Arts. And I grew up in youth development in a household of educators. So I was always pretty critical of like good educators. I could always just tease folks out like, nah, they don't really care, or they don't have a command of this classroom. I would just watch, even in high school, I would just watch things like that. And I had my eye out for good educators always and saw them rarely. But I remember specifically being taken by like your command of the room, how you were able to explain things, how cool you were, from how you dressed and how you talked and how you operated, how smooth you handled situations when they came up, right? You made it look easy and you made it look fun. And I could tell it was rewarding to you, right? And in retrospect, it was folks like you who planted that seed that made me want to be a teacher or a youth developer or something in working with kids, right? And so when I graduated and my plan, as we talk about, was to move to LA and be an actor, right? And you said, Ram, just come do 1 year. You said, LA will always be there. You said, LA will always be there. And it still is there, but I never went. You said, LA is always there. Come over to East Palo Alto Academy, where you were the VP at the time. And I said, man, let's do it. And I got hooked. I got hooked on that, right? And so over the years, watching like you lead in that role, and then founding principal of 2 incredible schools here in the Bay, and then making this really clean transition to lead the teacher education program at Stanford, right? Which makes so much sense for you at this stage in your career. It really has been incredible to watch you as a fan, but also as a mentee, right? And I still to this day look up to you as a leader, as a thinker, and now even as a father and a husband. So I'm excited about this conversation, man, and appreciate you doing this.
Wow. Ram, I appreciate all that. Me too. I'm a huge fan, man. I mean, you were just an amazing 15-year-old leader, so wise beyond your years, just a profound thinker. It's been amazing to watch you grow, evolve these past 2 decades. I'm thinking about the fact that when I met you, that was my 3rd year in education. And I'm wrapping up my Jordan year right now. This is year 23.
That's incredible.
So I was like a pretty young teacher at that point, man. Yeah. 25, I want to say. And here we go.
Here we are. So I was a 15-year-old. I want you to start taking us back to Jeff, the 15-year-old, right?
Yeah.
Like I love looking at adults and visualizing them as teenagers, because I look at teenagers and visualize them as adults. I guess that's just the youth developer in me. So take me back to that time. What was going on? Bring us into just your life and what has kind of contributed and planting seeds to who you are today.
Yeah. So let's talk about 1994. That was an amazing year. That's when I was 15. It was an incredible time. I mean, just a golden era of hip hop music, which definitely shaped me a lot as a young adult. Informed, I think, a lot of my fashion, my vision, my identity, the ways I wanted to show up was a lot driven by hip hop culture, which, at that point that was like, Tupac, Bay Area culture, rising, incredible East Coast hip hop. So that was a big part of my 15-year-old self. I was a basketball player, a long, lanky, skinny 6'1" kid, probably like a buck 50 at 15. But when I think about my 15-year-old self and kind of how it informed like my vision for my future, I was a sophomore in high school at a local high school here in the peninsula area of the Bay Area. And I think what I began to understand at that point in my young adulthood was how educational disparities and inequities showed up in a real system. I had the gift of growing up my entire life with a lot of educational privilege, the son of a Stanford professor, the son of a middle school counselor. Both my parents had, multiple advanced degrees and had gone to college. And I didn't want for anything. I had everything I ever wanted and needed, and was very, very privileged in that regard. But, as I shared, played basketball, a lot of my closest friends that I hooped with were from the other side of the freeway. And they didn't grow up with the same privileges and gifts that I was afforded socioeconomically, educationally. And in my high school, they had a very different path. I would kick it with them at lunch. We would play hoop after school at practice, but I didn't share classes with them after my freshman year. And I started to wonder as a sophomore, why is it that this dude wasn't in my AP World History class or in my my honors English 10. And that started to become clearer and clearer to me as I learned more about the world and racism and the way white supremacy has been embedded in every facet of educational systems in this country and the way that it operates. And I started to make sense of that more as I got to college, and then was able to like reflect on my high school experience and understand why it was that the Black and brown and Pacific Islander young people who I had the gift of going to school with, who came from a different side of town than the one I grew up in, had such different journeys than myself. And as a multiracial person of color, it was really hard for me to understand at first, like, one, why was I one of the only brown kids in my school growing up in K-8? And then when I got to high school and started to understand how the world operated more, because I feel like that's what my high school, my 15-year-old version of myself was able to understand a lot about the world through going to such a diverse, big, vibrant high school. And I think, and when I look back on it, like, I feel like that is what actually fueled my passion to really address, educational disparities and inequities throughout my own educational and professional journey.
So that makes a lot of sense in terms of like the perspective and what you were seeing. I will say though, that there's a lot of kids who go to MA and see exactly what you just saw, what you just explained, right? Over the years. And a majority of them did not choose to go to a top institution only to come back, right, with loans to be a teacher. So why did you do that? Given all of the opportunity you had for financial gain, what was that?
Well, I think so. Drawing on a term used by this amazing platform that you and Demi are building, ambition. Like, my ambition angel, my whole life and still to this day, is my pops. My father, Professor Al Camarillo, instilled in me at a very young age, both through messaging, but more so through anything, just by modeling. The way you use your brilliance and your privilege and your opportunities to provide opportunities to others. that's essentially what his entire career was predicated on. How do I use my identity as a Latino leader, my platform, my voice to create more opportunity for those who look like me, um, who have historically been marginalized, historically been underrepresented in spaces, educational spaces. And I saw that from when I was like, it's as far back as I can remember, literally. I mean, I would go to his office here at Stanford, look at these bookshelves that were 3 times my height with all these like powerful titles about the history of Native people, indigenous folks, Black and African diasporic histories, Chicano, Chicana histories. And it inspired me to want to be able to use my gifts and my privilege to be able to do exactly what I saw him do, which is basically put on more folks of color. How do we open up more doors for folks of color? How do we allow for folks of color to make their way into spaces that they were historically denied access to, and are still really underrepresented in? And what better way is there to do that than in education, right? Education is the way to empower folks to have opportunities to position themselves to transform our communities, essentially. And so I was never mad at my homeboys in college at Penn that who didn't have some of my same privileges. Like, it comes back to privilege. They were first generation college dudes, and they're thriving. Like, they graduated from Wharton, they're engineers, they're making $750, $1 million, they're making a lot of money. But I also feel like none of them feel quite as fulfilled as I have felt in my career. And I don't think many of them have felt like for 23 years, they wake up every day and just have the opportunity to do something that they love, do something that they're passionate about, and do something that truly like transforms the world. Around a vision of what it means to create a more just and equitable society, which I can honestly look back on my career and say, like, I know that I have been able to contribute to that. And that feels incredible. You can't monetize that.
Yeah, that's right. It's clear to me, both from what you're saying, but also from just knowing you and watching you over the years, like how influential your dad was as as an example of that. And that inclusivity, like your consideration for all of these different identities and what their experience is in education, and how intentional and passionate you are about making sure that all of those folks are considered, is like very, very clear. And so I'm curious, right? It's clear how that shows up in the classroom. It is clear. I hope folks can visualize how clear that is as a principal, and honestly, as a professional. You've not even just with the youth, you've been putting on, professionals of color. I'm saying, my wife being one of them. You were who really pushed her and opened her eyes that, you should be a teacher. You should go back to STEP, and you use your connections. Like, you operate like that. So it's a deep conviction. I'm curious how that shows up now as, in leading the teacher education program there. If somebody were to ask you, what do you do and what are you trying to accomplish in your role there, how would you answer that?
First of all, let's talk about your amazing wife for a minute. Kendra is a special leader, educator. You're a lucky man. It's been amazing to track her journey too, and just love what y'all are doing, Remi. So proud of y'all and the family that you're raising. It's really special to see, man. Let's see. So I think that was a kind of a multi-layered question. How does my ability to connect and kind of work to help empower folks to step into spaces that maybe they didn't, historically have not had access to, translate to my work as a teacher, educator, and leader here at Stanford? So I think, number one, having the opportunity to shape and mold and help to empower young educators from diverse backgrounds in the most formative stage of their teacher identity development is such a powerful gift and opportunity. When I was 22 and I had the opportunity to be mentored by a phenomenal 8-year veteran educator, I mean, the teachings that I was instilled by him, like, still live with me to this day, right? So the work that we're doing now at STEP, the things, the teaching, the foundation that we're trying to create to help young educators freedom dream and envision, how they want to enact a racial and social justice and equity vision for their teaching, is so transformative. And I don't take for granted for a second the immense opportunity that is. How does it translate? I mean, I think that what I value the most is, like, I bring with me the communities that I have had the gift of serving in my 20-year career. And that is East Palo Alto, Compton, California, San Francisco, with a particular focus on, like, the HP, the Mission, the Fillmore, Deep East Oakland, and East San Jose. Those are the communities that I've had the gift of serving, learning from, and understanding the intersection of culture, community, identity, and what it means for education. And I keep that front and center in every single move that I make as a teacher educator. Like, those students and the families and the caregivers that I have had the gift of working with in my 2-decade career, that I bring them with me to Stanford. They are right here. They are literally in my heart, in my spirit, in everything that I try to do. So whether we're teaching a class on how to become a restorative classroom leader and a warm demander, like, I'm thinking about my Compton babies. I'm thinking about my East Palo Alto babies. I'm thinking about what they need. How do we approach a classroom to create a affirming, loving, beautiful, vibrant community that honors who they are, their cultures, their communities, their families, and breaks down every facet of carcerality in schools, every facet of overly disciplining Black and brown young people in schools. How do we break all of that down to cultivate spaces that are the opposite of that are vibrant, affirming, restorative classroom spaces, whether it's that class, whether I'm thinking about teaching assessment or unit design, or how to think about being an anti-racist educator in 2024. It doesn't matter what facet of the teaching profession we're talking about. And there are so many facets of what it means to be a well-rounded and sustained educator. I'm thinking about the communities that I've had the gift of serving and what those students and those families need. And I think that's been the biggest gift that I've been able to bring to my work as a teacher educator at Stanford is, how do I bring communities and voices that I've had the gift of serving into a space in a school that doesn't always think about those communities and those students and those families. And I think if I've been able, like, I think about, if I could prepare a teacher to go into the west side of Compton, or go into East Oakland, or go into East Palo Alto, and be ready in year one to make an immediate impact, like, they can go anywhere. They could do anything in any community, right? And that's the work. That's the work right there. So
I love that.
It's translated well. Sometimes you don't always realize, like, or know or see how your is your high school game going to translate to D1? Is the D1 going to translate to the pros? And if this is the pros, it's translated smoother than I envisioned it translating, which has been a real gift.
Yeah. And I've seen that. Kendra and I both have seen that and heard from the students. They feel it. And so, you have you're sitting in an interesting spot with interesting perspective on, like, the national education scene. I mean, first and foremost, you're in the School of Education at Stanford University, one of the top universities in the world. So not only are you focused on preparing your teachers, you're surrounded by folks who are thinking about what are the latest trends and how do we push forward the research around education. Then you're working with these teachers, a new crop every single year, understanding how they're processing what it means to come into the classroom. then those teachers are actually doing their teaching at schools. So you are still connected to schools who are teaching real teenagers right now, right? And doing so across the Bay. So given that you have this kind of like national perspective on the world of education and what's happening in schools, specifically around teacher preparation, what are some themes or some trends that you're seeing in your field right now that are relevant to the Black and brown students that you carry in your heart and that we're trying to build for?
It's a great question. There's so many. I mean, these last 5 years have been so turbulent for education. If you just think about what a teacher who, let's say you entered the profession 5 years ago, you're in your 5th year now, what you have endured. Number one, like, you started your career on Zoom. Let's talk about that for a minute. Let's talk about all your teacher preparation, and then boom, like you're teaching little black boxes on a screen, right? Then you come back from the pandemic, the multiple pandemics, right? The racial pandemic, the corona pandemic. And I mean, I've seen it referred to as like a triple pandemic. If you look at kind of like the climate crisis and the environmental crisis that we've been navigating. And now all of a sudden, year two, you're holding that. You're having to hold young people and their healing and their reentry and the trauma that they're bringing with them. And that first year back, was a wild year. Like, that was one of the wildest years that people can recite in education, right?
Wow.
And then finally in year 3, you had some level of normalcy, if you want to even refer to it as such, but I don't even know that we can call it that. And that's like you finally got to really experience like maybe a real year one. So saying all this to say that I think some of the biggest themes I've seen, and this is not just for young teenagers, but young educators entering the profession, right? Like, my average student is 22, 23. They were college freshmen. They were fresh in college on Zoom. They were themselves on Zoom. Biggest shift I've seen in my career is the focus and attention on mental health and wellness. When I started my career in 2001, I don't ever recall a young person being saying openly, like, I have anxiety.
Right.
Like, I don't ever remember that being a thing. It wasn't talked about. It wasn't openly discussed. Kids were not in tune with their mental health needs, what they were experiencing from a mental health side of things. And I can't think of one bigger thing in my career that I've seen shift to what it is now, where, it's not uncommon that you go into a classroom and a third of the students are openly discussing their mental health needs, if not more. Anxiety, depression, all of these things were furthered during the pandemic, by the way, exacerbated. And we're seeing that even in our own community of educators, like the amount of need that young educators, particularly young educators of color, are coming into the profession with. Like, they have their own mental health, social emotional needs that need to be met by schools and districts and communities that are supporting educators, even before they can begin to think about meeting the needs and supporting young people, 14 and 15-year-olds who are coming to the classroom with mental health and social emotional needs and really trauma. So how do we equip educators in 2024 to embrace and start to think about what it means to transform their own trauma into healing, so that they can ultimately do that very same work with Black and brown young people that they are serving in communities that have long suffered various forms of trauma? And how do we cultivate spaces that can be, healing centered and affirming for young people who are coming to school holding so much? Because we know, and there's so much research that proves that if you can't do that, like, young people can't learn. They can't learn. They're not going to think about, they're not going to be able to focus on geometry or ethnic studies. In some ways, I think ethnic studies is healing in many ways. I'll get to that in a minute, actually, because it's making me think of one other thing. But I think that's a huge issue. Mental health, schools are not equipped yet. Teachers are not equipped yet for the level of need that we are seeing. We need a radical transformation in the way that schools and educational communities think about mental health. It's an enormous issue.
Enormous issue.
Enormous.
And I want you to continue. You have some other thoughts around trends, but just to that point, the beautiful thing of what I'm hearing you say is, yes, they've experienced incredible trauma over the last 5 years, but it's kind of brought it to the surface in a way that now the conversation is being had in a way that it hasn't been had before. So now teachers are being forced to deal with their own trauma, which, by the way, for centuries, they've already brought to the classroom. Right. Just never had a space or the language to deal with it themselves, and realizing that kids have always been bringing their trauma to school as well. Right. And so to see schools now as places of healing, both for teachers and for students, is kind of a silver lining of the last couple years as well.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, we talk about this a lot. Like, you can't show up for young people until you show up for yourself. You have to know who you are to show up authentically as an educator in a classroom community. Otherwise, like, young people will sniff out every sense of inauthenticity. Right. They are the greatest at that. Like, if you are not true to who you are and real to who you are and in tune with your authentic humanity in the classroom, like, one, you can't create those spaces for young people to be authentic in their humanity. And kids, they see through that so easy. Like, they're the greatest at that. Young people, they can see that shit from a mile away.
That's a fact. So that makes sense. So, and then you were good. So mental health.
Yep.
And the trauma that's happened, but also this beautiful, silver lining where now we're having the conversations and the healing is happening early. And you're doing an important work in terms of helping young educators recognize the importance of them dealing with themselves as they enter the classroom. Not even before, but just like as an ongoing practice, right?
Got to do it.
And so then you were going to talk about, you mentioned kind of ethnic studies and maybe some trends around that. Like,
I think this is another huge wave. If you think about what has shifted in our state and in our country, but certainly California is the epicenter. Like, the high school class of 2030 will be the very first class of any high school group in the history of this country to have completed a minimum, a semester of ethnic studies to graduate high school in the state of California. And that is exciting. It is long overdue. And it is a real opportunity to also center what it means to heal. Because as people of color, one of the ways we've been traumatized by educational systems is like by not having an opportunity to truly learn who we are in school. Right. You learn a history that is, historically, this is changing, but one that is not your own, one that might, marginalize your experience to like one little sliver of the textbook with a picture of Cesar Chavez or Harriet Tubman or Rosa Parks or whatever. That's like what we learn, versus I get to dive into a year-long experience. And now middle schools are thinking about this, right? If ninth grade has a year-long ethnic studies class, how can we set it up in middle school? And what we're seeing is, because we know this, anyone who took a class in college, right, which was certainly my first opportunity, probably yours too, Rem, to really explore your own history, we know what that felt like, right? We know the empowerment that came with that when we got to learn about our own history in a way that we didn't throughout our K-12 journey. And it was healing centered. It was empowering. It was enlightening. It was invigorating. And that is what is happening right now in every high school in California. Seeds are being planted to figure out, how do we cultivate educational spaces that center what is the most diverse student population literally in the world? How do we elevate Black history, Latina history, Asian American history of every ethnicity and story, Jewish history, any marginalized history that has not been at the center of what it is that has historically been there. And that's a unique and amazing opportunity. So that's something we're thinking a lot about too at STEP. We want to be able to produce the next wave of ethnic studies practitioners that are going to go out, transform the field, be ready to fill all these new positions, right? And please know, we are also in a time right now where they are fighting back against this wave with everything that we have. Conservative groups, they have conservative groups, just like they've weaponized every advancement in DEI nationally that we've seen, and there's been a backlash. We're seeing that here too. There are groups trying to shut down the ethnic studies requirement, trying to weaponize ethnic studies as being things that it's not, anti-Semitic, you name it. But this is the context in which our teachers are going to be entering the profession. Tons of advancement, opportunity, awareness, right, around so many critical issues that affect Black and brown youth, and a massive backlash, both nationally and regionally, to the progress that we have made in the last 4 or 5 years since Black Lives Matter really gained steam.
Wow.
Yeah, it's wild. It's a wild time.
It is a wild time, and it's a powerful illustration you're giving and kind of insight for folks who may not understand the conversations that are happening and that started about 4 or 5 years ago. And now they're taking shape in ways that I think folks don't understand. So one of the things that hits me, though, is that these conversations are happening, and these are sensitive conversations, not ones that schools are used to having. Like, they're not necessarily set up to have the conversation around student mental health, let alone teacher mental health. That's not really normal for this space. And then obviously race has been framed in a certain way in the public education system, at least. And so now that's recognizing we need a shift there. So with these two kind of new big topics, I'm just curious, and on the spot here, are there any schools that are, in your mind, models, doing this really, really well, navigating this well? What are they trying? What are they learning? What does it take for a school or a program to do that? And this could even just be an opportunity to give a little shout out to somebody if you've seen that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I think there are schools, everybody, this is a journey, right? And it just, I think that it's a lifelong journey. Like, when we talk about anti-racist work in education, we are looking to upend and disrupt systems that are deeply entrenched in systemic racism and white supremacy culture, schools in this country are as old as this country is old. And so when you're looking to uproot systems that are embedded that deeply in the fabric of systemic racism in America, it's a journey that never stops. So everybody is, wanting to make some progress in some regards. But it's a journey. And so what I'd say is, I don't know any school there is no school that has arrived at that journey. Let me just name that. There are schools that are doing a lot more than others. And there's definitely a few that I've encountered that I think are, well on their way. Really progressive leadership, the right vision, hiring a lot of teachers of color, understanding what it means to support teachers of color. And I can shout out a few for sure. So I think one of the dopest schools I've encountered in my time at STEP is a Rise Charter in Oakland. It's in the heart of the Fruitvale. It is a small, college preparatory, culturally sustaining community, incredible leadership, amazing students, vibrant culture, and they're trying to do the work. We send our students out that way. So shout out to the good folks at the Rise. I want to shout out and lift up the Ethnic Studies Department and Ethnic Studies and Social Justice Academy at James Logan High School. I don't know enough yet about the whole school. It's a huge, comprehensive high school in Union City, Newark area. But what I can say is that the Ethnic Studies and Social Justice Academy folks, Yvonne Santos, his colleagues, Miss Manny, these are folks who are about the work. They've been doing ethnic studies work for 20 years plus at James Logan. They have a full department, 15 different course offerings, everything from Filipinx, heritage, Asian American studies, women's ethnic studies, a Black girls 9th grade affinity seminar, Rasa studies, and a vibrant group of passionate, justice-oriented educators who are leading that work. So that's like a dope spot if you want to check out, ethnic studies educators who are trying to resist and trying to build something, for kids of color, by educators of color, and are, certainly carving out the space to do the work that they believe in. Those are two that come to mind. There's more.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Oberfeld High School in East San Jose is another high school that I really appreciate. Phenomenal leadership. Vito, their principal, been there 18 years, building something really special for, first generation Latina, Vietnamese American young people in the heart of East San Jose. Staff is like 80-90% people of color. They're doing some great work to send out like first generation young people into the world ready to go. Those are three high schools that I really appreciate, and ones that we have built enhanced partnerships with that staff that I feel really comfortable sending first generation, teachers of color to learn and grow and thrive in communities of color.
That's awesome.
Yeah, right, I appreciate the time for that.
Yeah. All right, so I want to head into our youth development rapid fire, how we end every episode with 4 questions.
Let's do it.
All right, so number 1, if you can choose a one critical life skill that every teen should master to be successful as an adult, what would it be?
Channel your passion, find it, pursue it, and let that be what drives whatever you do after high school. I've evolved a lot of my thinking around at first, I think this was my own educational privilege getting in the way of my vision for young people and their futures. Like, college is not for everyone. I hope it can be for a lot of y'all. But I think that, what's more important is that you find your passion and you develop a post-secondary plan that matches your passion. You got to have a plan. I think that anybody who doesn't have a plan and enters the world without figuring out how they can fuel their plans with their passion will find themselves lost. And if you find yourself lost, that's where you're going to find yourself and, working a job that's not fulfilling, that doesn't make a lot of money, and that doesn't allow you to marry your passion with your ultimate vision for your future. So find your passion, let it drive you in whatever you do.
Love it. All right, number 2, can you recommend a tool or an app that you think every teen should be using?
So you're not going to love this one because I think they should use Ambition for sure. But other than Ambition, I'm going to say y'all got to get off your phones and experience the world. Like, talk to people, talk to your family, talk to your friends. Just put your phone down for a minute and engage with the world. That's what I worry the most about this generation is I feel like they're losing their ability to engage with people, talking in community, being a human being that interacts with other human beings. And so I would say, there's no shortage of tools and apps. Use the ones that are good for you, but please, don't forget the power of what it means to sit down and have a humanizing conversation.
Facts. Love that.
Yeah. Got to go with that one.
What's the best piece of advice that you would give to an adult who's looking to work with a teen or a group of teens?
Talked about this a little earlier, but just show up authentically. The best thing you can do is model what it means to be your authentic self so young people can truly bring forth their authentic humanity. And I feel that when you're working with Black and brown youth, particularly in urban settings, the number one thing we can do to support them is affirm them in who they are. Once they see that you care about them, you show up as your authentic self to create a space where they feel affirmed, they feel cared for their authentic selves. You can do anything with them. You can lead them wherever you hope to lead them. But that's a key ingredient that if that's lost, you're not going to be able to do anything.
Powerful. All right. Now we're talking to the young people. You have 30 seconds. The attention of every Black and brown teenager in America, what's your message to them? What do you tell them?
Number one, you are beautiful. You are deeply valued and affirmed for who you are. Who you are matters. Show up as who you are. Value who you are. Value your identity. Be authentic to who you are. Find your passion. When you find your passion, surround yourself with a group of peers, young people, and mentors, femtors, leaders who can help you channel that passion into a vision for your future. And when you can do all those things, I've found in my career, Black and brown young people, y'all are unstoppable forces that nobody can reckon with when you're able to show up authentically, channel your passion, surround yourself with a village of people who can help you fuel that passion into a plan for your vision, and execute that vision, and then boom, there we go.
I love it. Mr. C, thank you, brother.
Appreciate the time, Remi. It was a lot of fun being with you. Best of luck to you and Demi. Huge supporter of Ambition. Love what y'all are doing. Cannot wait to see how this entire journey manifests to empower Black and brown young people, especially, but all young people, in finding their passion and finding their ambition and driving towards that with their future. So thank you for y'all work.
Appreciate it, brother.